Shabbat Shalom and Hag Sameach, everyone. I think the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, but we've always done it this way. Jews are really fond of saying this. We've always done it this way. This basically guarantees that your organization will eventually cease to be relevant because it will never change, and things that don't change can't sustain themselves. The thing about, but we've always done it this way, is that we rarely have always done it that exact way. Usually we did it for a little bit, and then we moved on or forgot about it. And Sukkot is a great example of this. I want to introduce to you a timeline of Sukkot, or in English as it is called, the Festival of Booths. So you should know that when Sukkot is first talked about in the Torah, it's not in Parshat Emor in Leviticus, which is the Parsha we usually read for Sukkot. It's actually in the book of Exodus, in the book of Shemot, which is way before Leviticus. By the way, in Shemot, it's not even called Sukkot in there. It's called Hag HaAsif, which is usually translated as the Festival of Ingathering. The text is really confusing about how to celebrate the holiday. But guess what the Torah does not tell you to do in the book of Shemot to celebrate Sukkot? It does not tell you to sit in a sukkah, and it does not tell you to wave around a lulav and an etrog. It describes a harvest festival that's probably more like Shavuot or an American Thanksgiving. It was supposed to be more like a feast day. And we know that Sukkot became the most important feast day in the biblical era. It is literally called the Feast of Adonai, or later they just call it the Feast. In fact, Sukkot became way more important of a feast than the Passover Seder, which wouldn't be created until thousands of years later. Sukkot eventually became the appropriate time for important Jewish state ceremonies. Moses instructed the children of Israel to gather for a reading of the entire Torah during Sukkot every 7th year. King Solomon dedicates the first temple in Jerusalem during Sukkot. That was actually the Haftorah we read this morning. And Sukkot was the first holiday observed after the resumption of sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem after Babylonian captivity. Sukkot was a big, big deal. But according to our Tanakh, what was not a big deal was dwelling in a booth and shaking a lulav and etrog. How do I know this? Well, I'm about to tell you. We already discussed how Sukkot was described in Exodus as a harvest festival and not dwelling in a booth, lulav shaking ordeal, but everyone likes to quote Leviticus. God told Moses to command the people, on the first day you shall take the product of a chadar tree, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that the future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in Sukkot booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. Okay, that's the very famous part from the Torah. However, in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, we're told that the Israelites did not live in booths or Sukkot. We're told in 2 separate verses that they live in what the Torah calls ohalim, which translates to tents. So even while the Torah was being written down, people were confused about what structures the Israelites actually lived in. By the way, what is a hadar tree? No one has any idea. Hadar literally means beautiful in Hebrew. Like nowhere in the Torah does the word etrog appear. So the initial recipe for what we're supposed to shake is also uncertain. You should know by the time of Nehemiah the prophet, who lived roughly 900 to 1,000 years after the book of Bamidbar is written, he says that Jews are just now starting to dwell in booths again to celebrate Sukkot, a practice that he says the people haven't done since the time of Joshua. But Nehemiah says people aren't shaking the four species. He says they go out to the mountains and bring leafy branches of olive trees, pine myrtles, palms, and other leafy trees to make their booths. Apparently, the people in Nehemiah's day didn't know about shaking lulavs and etrogs. They thought you were supposed to build your sukkah out of the four species. I have no idea where they got the idea for olive trees. So why am I telling you all this? Because you should know that we have not always done Sukkot this way. It's important to recognize that there has always been an evolution within Jewish tradition. Whereas before we sacrificed animals in the temple in Jerusalem, nowadays we pray together in a synagogue, and that's okay. The only real problem is when we refuse to recognize that in order for our religion to remain relevant, we have to be willing to allow our Torah to be a living, breathing document. I'm sure if our ancestors saw how we celebrate Sukkot nowadays, they might be somewhat confused. But they would also be confused with us wearing yarmulkes and having bar and bat mitzvahs and celebrating Purim and Hanukkah, because they didn't do those things. They also wouldn't understand women reading from the Torah or girls wearing a talit. But I'm sure that they would recognize the camaraderie and community here that we have at Agudas Achim. And I think that is more important than all the minutiae of how we practice Torah law that we oftentimes don't really understand the origin of. So this Sukkot, I invite you to experience what might be confusing, but realize that our ancestors have been confused for a long time too. As long as we're confused together and willing to ask questions and try new things, that's the only way we'll be able to pass down these beautiful traditions to our children. Hag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.